Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mailbox for the 24th of September 2012. My name is TotalBiscuit, bringing you your daily dose of community interaction, gaming discussion, and all that good stuff. You can email in mailbox at cynicalbrit.com, that's mailbox at cynicalbrit.com, with topics for future shows. The game in the background is Torchlight 2. I do have a full assessment of this coming. It's mostly because I want to co-commentate it with the missus, so once she's done with all of her stuff, we'll get it dealt with. Expect it over the next couple of days. You've got plenty of Torchlight coverage on this channel anyway, so I'm sure you can wait. First email comes in here from Andre that says, recently the game Dogfight 1942, an arcadey flight sim, was released on Steam. I and many others on the discussion forum were very disappointed to find that the game essentially supports only two methods of control, mouse and keyboard or 360 controller. I would assume that most of us had expected the game to at least support actual joysticks, which I think would be a given for any flight sim released in 2012. Do you think the developers should be responsible for telling you that their game will only function or function well on certain hardware or with certain controller setups, or should users adapt or just assume based on what they know about the game? I know Dark Souls had some similar troubles, with Valve eventually adding the controller recommended disclaimer, and with the amount of console ports, this seems like a real issue. It is becoming increasingly problematic. Games that you would expect to use certain kinds of controls aren't using them, and it isn't mentioned, as you accurately pointed out. I was looking forward to another game that would work quite nicely with my Cytec X52 that I just picked up, thinking, hey, this will be great for flight sims and a couple of other things, and when MechWarrior Online comes out, and flying in PlanetSide, and yeah, that's fine, but a game like Dogfight 1942 seems like it really should use a joystick, and it doesn't. The problem is not necessarily that it doesn't use a joystick, although we'll come on to that in a minute. The problem is that the keyboard and mouse controller is also diabolically bad. That is another game that should have the controller strongly recommended disclaimer on it, and the only reason that Steam actually put it there is because, no doubt, they got a ton of complaints. They don't individually investigate every game. In fact, they actually do very little to ensure that a game is suitable for the Steam service, which is unfortunate. When it comes to Dogfight 1942, the planes handle with keyboard and mouse like a really drunken swan. That's probably the only way that I can describe it. They are all over the place. You cannot control them properly at all. They just ignore your commands most of the time and wildly flail in whatever direction they decide to go to. Precision control without a 360 pad on that game is impossible. And of course, without a joystick, it's not going to fly all that well anyway. Joystick is optimal for games like that. It always has been. That's why the peripheral exists. It's the same with racing wheels. They are good for racing games. Big surprise there. The question boils down to this: how responsible does Steam have to be to report this kind of information? Now, if we were to go down to Dogfight 1942, we'd find some information in the bottom right-hand corner, which is a really bad place to put it, by the way. As far as I'm concerned, it should be far higher than that. You've got a community tab that's way, way higher with a bunch of Steam achievements. Like, this doesn't matter. Move that down, put the interesting information up near the top. Get rid of add to your wish list. Who the balls actually uses that outside of the giveaway contests that Valve sometimes does? And actually put this useful information up there. It's got single player, local co-op, Steam achievements, controller enabled, full controller support, which is a lie. Actually, this isn't even just the case of omitting information, this is a flat-out lie. The Steam page claims that this game has full controller support. I can tell you for a fact, having tried it last night, that it doesn't. It does not work with the joystick, it has no option to work with the joystick, it barely works with keyboard and mouse, it is designed for a 360 pad. Now, the problem with Steam is that they're not selling boxed copies of video games, so they must be the box. The information that you get on the back of a box, such as system requirements, recommendations as to whether or not it supports joysticks or anything like that, that information needs to be on the Steam page. And that information is usually provided by the people that made the game in the first place. The problem is, if they provide inaccurate information, is it Valve's responsibility to actually correct that? Is it Valve's responsibility to look into it? I believe we had this in a previous mailbox, where we were talking about games that didn't work properly and how much quality assurance or quality control they would have to apply, how much responsibility they had to keep their store in order. And it's a really difficult one if you're being fed information by a company that is clearly not telling the truth. I don't think that Steam employees put full controller support in there having tested the game. That goes against what Steam does. They do minimal tests to make sure the game actually loads and runs properly. They do not do that kind of investigation. Some might argue that they should, but no other retail store does that. It can be kind of hard to argue that Valve should be responsible for this kind of stuff, but I'll tell you what they should be responsible for doing: correcting that information and letting people know. There should be a disclaimer at the top of the screen which says 360 pad strongly recommended, because that game is awful on keyboard and mouse. It works with a 360 pad only. I would arguably say that it's worse than Dark Souls. It is actually, because at least in Dark Souls you can mostly control your character. I couldn't even control the sodding plane. I went careening into the ocean because one minor twitch in one direction sent my plane into a sodding roll for no apparent reason. There's all sorts of problems with the controls in that game. And what they should do as well is correct the information that says full controller support, because it's a lie. More to the point, what does that even mean? The information that Steam provides is more often than not inconsistent, and that's a real problem. If I go to X3 Terran Conflict, for instance, which is an awesome game, by the way, and I look at the information that Steam has on it, what has it got? It's got single-player Steam achievements. That's all it says. It doesn't say a damn thing about joystick support. And of course it doesn't mention the fact that that game is optimally played with a joystick, although you can play it with keyboard and mouse if you so desire. Where's controller enabled for that? Where's joystick enabled for that? That isn't there. It's not part of the information. And don't get me started on Steam Game Hub. I can't rely on that to give me reliable information. That's just a bunch of random people leaving a bunch of random comments, and of course random screenshots appearing from seemingly nowhere. I go to my library and I say, oh, okay, let's have a look at Jet Set Radio. Right-click, view Game Hub. What information does it give me? Bugger all. It's got a bunch of screenshots, and it's got discussions kind of all mushed together in this weird grid format that makes finding information absolutely impossible. While I do not expect full-on quality assurance and checking from Steam, what I do expect is incorrect information on the storefront to be corrected and warnings to be put out that make sure people don't buy games that are unsuitable and unfit for purpose. Dogfight 1942 in its current state assuredly is, and I do think it's Valve's responsibility, now that that information is out there, to let people know about it. This email comes in from Sasha that says, Awesome Nauts has recently released skins, which I don't know if I'm alright with. League of Legends does this effectively, but it's free to play. Awesome Nauts is not. If they're already taking $10 from you for the game, why should you need to pay more, sometimes more than the game is worth, to buy skins? People that have bought these skins have become jerks, always saying they're better than you because they have a skin. You can't even unlock the skins in-game without real money. The only reason LoL gets away with it is because that's the only way they make money. Here, they get money for the game and charge you for skins. My question is this: is it okay that there is now paid Awesome Nauts DLC that you can't get in-game? Yes. Yes, there is. It's questions like this when the nasty words gamer entitlement keep popping up, because they're horrible. They've been so warped by the media and the gaming scene in general into bizarre and horrible monstrosities that I don't even recognize anymore. But here's the thing. You are entitled to the game as it is on launch and the support required to make sure that game works as intended after launch. You are also entitled to have the game work in multiplayer and have the servers maintained for a reasonable length of time after the game has launched. And that's about it. When it comes to cosmetic skins or any kind of DLC whatsoever, you are not entitled to get that for free. I'd like to point out that the guys that made Awesome Nauts did actually provide free content. They added a couple of extra heroes in for the PC release. And that was something they didn't have to do, but they did anyway, because they're awesome like that. When it comes to skins for games, I really find myself hard-pressed to care. Because it's cosmetic. It's entirely cosmetic. It doesn't affect the game in any way, shape, or form. This is not buying power. Now, if they were selling heroes, and you could only get those heroes by buying them, that's something that I would have a problem with. That is selling power. That is unnecessary. It's inappropriate. It has negative effects on the player base. You pay to get better stuff, which is not reasonable from a game balance standpoint. But paying to look prettier or look different, that doesn't affect me. Now, you're saying that, oh, people are acting like assholes. Oh, welcome to the internet. This is not Ronimo's fault. It's not Ronimo's fault that these guys want to be jackasses. If someone unlocked a skin that required it to be level 5,000 or complete certain achievements that were really hard to get, he'd probably still be a jerk with that. You could still get it, but he most likely would act cocky as a direct result. Lest we also forget the other side of the coin. People that buy skins are often looked down upon, for whatever reason. I have no idea why that is, but I frequently received criticism for buying skins in League of Legends. Let's ignore the fact that I have all my skins for free from the referral bonus. Let's just throw that out the window. Nobody actually knows that, at least not randoms that I meet in game. It's like, oh, why did you spend money on skins? It's supposed to be a free-to-play game. Or, oh, why do you spend money on skins? This is just a $10 game. Costs less than a meal at a chain restaurant. Nobody is surprised that people are jerks on the internet. This is definitely not a new thing at all. And as far as I'm concerned, they are entitled to sell skin packs. Any company, it doesn't matter who it is, it could be Activision, EA, or some tiny little indie like Ronimo, they are all entitled to sell cosmetic skin packs after the game has come out, and you are not entitled to have them for free. The game can be a free game, a $5, $10, $20, $60. They released a skin pack, a $10 skin pack, for Transformers Fall of Cybertron. You can meet Dinobots in multiplayer. It doesn't affect the gameplay in any way. None whatsoever. You gain no special powers, it's all cosmetic. Who was up in arms? Basically nobody. Why? Because, again, it is not their responsibility to give free content. It's nice when it happens. But companies also got to eat. Ronimo is not exactly flush for cash right now. It enters a highly competitive scene on PC, whereas it essentially had a free run through PS3 and 360, since there are, aside from Monday Night Combat, and that's if you even count that, no other MOBAs currently available on those consoles. We will see Guardians of Middle-earth come out, and then no doubt a bunch of other Dota-style games that will appear on console at some point, but they had a free run through that, and then they enter the lion's den of Dota, Dota 2, League of Legends, Super Monday Night Combat, Heroes of Newerth, Smite, even arguably Bloodline Champions and things like that. Yeah, it's pretty damn competitive, so I don't honestly begrudge them one little bit. I don't begrudge any company that does this, as long as they are not wasting time that could otherwise be spent on making sure the game works. Don't start selling me DLC packs until your game actually works as intended, please. It's really rather insulting, but when it comes to Awesome Noughts, that game works fine. People are gonna be jerks in Dota clones. It happens. Skins do not cause that. Dumb people cause that. This one comes in from Army of One that says, watching through the Mailbox archives when I happened upon your episode in which you answered a question about an FCC patent pertaining to more iterations of current generation consoles, a new Super Slim PS3 specifically, being a reaction to the upcoming Wii U release with regards to delaying Sony and Microsoft's next generation. In the videos you listed a series of very valid points where the Wii U stood at the time. You listed the lack of new hardcore content for launch, the inability to stream multiple gamepads, and horsepower concerns, and compared it to the Dreamcast as a too-late-to-the-party kind of system. I'm curious as to what your thoughts for the Wii U are now that Nintendo released many more details about the system's launch. Earlier this year, Nintendo announced that the Wii U will be shipping for $300 or $350 depending on the version, compared with a 360 and Kinect being $250 at the moment, and PS3 being $250 standalone. I believe this to be a more than reasonable price. Nintendo also revealed Bayonetta 2 as a Wii U exclusive, Black Ops on the console, the ability to play with two pads for games that support it, and the whole home entertainment hub called Nintendo TV, as well as the console having 2 gigs of RAM and games running in 1080p. What are your thoughts now that Nintendo has given more details on the next console? How do you think that Microsoft and Sony will react, if at all, to the old new kid on the block? Alright, well, I actually went back to have a look at that mailbox, because, needless to say, I do these on a daily basis. It's really hard to remember what I said in episode, I think it was 156 or whatever. Anyway, what I said back then was based, of course, on information that we had at the time, and things have developed quite significantly. I think perhaps the biggest announcement is actually the fact that Bayonetta 2 is going to be a Wii U exclusive, and I looked into it, and there are strong indications, and by strong indications I mean they said it in a bloody interview, that this game would not be released without Nintendo's help. Sega did not want to publish and greenlight a second Bayonetta game, even though Bayonetta sold about 1.8 million copies, which is not a bad number for an original IP. Especially not a title which is clearly aimed at hardcore gamers. So you can thank Nintendo for the fact that Bayonetta 2 even exists in the first place. Secondly, seeing a Platinum Games title on Nintendo is not actually that unusual. Mad World came out on the Nintendo Wii, and Infinite Space came out on the Nintendo DS. So it's not like Platinum Games doesn't have any experience working on Nintendo platforms. Far from it. As more technical details come to light, it seems to me that we will have a console which is marginally more powerful than the 360 and the PS3. Most of the developer concerns that we heard a few months back seem to have evaporated somewhat, and claims are that these games will be running in 1080p, although not necessarily at 60 frames per second. Comparisons to the Dreamcast are still very apt considering its position within the market, but one thing I didn't mention in that video was a couple of the main reasons why the Dreamcast failed. One of them being how easy it was to pirate for that system, which caused rampant piracy across the board. And secondly, because Sega did not market the bloody thing properly at all. Sega are useless. It's not just that either. Sega at that point had a history of releasing complete and total garbage. More to the point, they had a history of not properly supporting said garbage. Think about people that bought the 32X or the Mega CD. They paid a ton of money for these things, and they ended up being completely bloody useless. The Sega Saturn was released at a really weird time. They just shoved it out on the shelf with no marketing whatsoever. They also created a system that was very hard to code for. They made the Sega Game Gear, for God's sake, which, while it had some good games, was not even close to the Game Boy in terms of portability, not to mention the fact that it ate 6 AA batteries. Should we also mention the Sega Nomad, which was even worse in that regard? People were scared of Sega's hardware and what Sega would do and when they would just move on to the next thing. Do you really want to buy a new console from Sega after seeing what they brought out in the last few years when it came to hardware? I mean, come on, their last major hardware success before the Dreamcast was the Sega Genesis, and then everything they did after that flopped, either because of their own incompetence or just because it didn't do well on the market. There was an element of it being something of a stopgap console because there were developers and indeed consumers that decided just to wait for the PlayStation 2. Because, of course, the PlayStation 1 was a wild success, the Sega Saturn certainly was not. But I don't think that the Wii U at this stage is actually going to have those problems. It's probably going to suffer from the fact that people seem to think now that Nintendo is for kids, which is a very odd attitude. If you'd said that last generation, I'd have looked at you very oddly and think, Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem, Resident Evil 4, which were GameCube exclusives for the longest time, all of the Zelda games, and do we not remember those things? Apparently, no, we don't. Those were games aimed at core gamers, and there were plenty more where those came from. I think that's the thing that the Wii U is going to suffer from the most. It's not going to be down to the fact that it's not going to end up being as powerful as those systems. It doesn't necessarily have to be. You could be the weakest system in the lineup, and you can still sell many millions of units, and lest we forget, the Nintendo Wii is the 5th best-selling console of all time behind the PlayStation, Game Boy, Nintendo DS, and PlayStation 2, having shifted 96.56 million units. The 360 has shifted 68 million, the PlayStation 3 has shifted 63 million. Now, you can argue that a lot of Nintendo Wiis are not being used in households anymore to play core games, and you would be right. But the thing is, that's a bit of a catch-22, isn't it? They're not being used to play core games because there aren't any core games. There are no core games because people aren't playing core games on the Wii. God. I think the acquisition of Bayonetta 2 shows a very clear direction from Nintendo, as well as the fact that there are core games available on day one for core gamers. The Pro Controller is a very good thing indeed, and allows for traditional games to be played absolutely fine on the Wii U, and I think that this time around, Nintendo are actually shooting to try and get everybody. Can they get the casual gamers? Can they get the ones that just want to do the fitness thing? Can they get the core gamers? Can they get all of them at once? Maybe they can, and I'd like to present as evidence the success of the Kinect. The 360 is a console that supports both core gamers and absolute casuals. Admittedly, it needs a peripheral to do it, but in this case, you have everything built into the machine from the get-go. You can, in theory, appeal to that, and if the console sells well, and if it continues to have a very large installed user base before these other consoles come out, then games will still be made for it. It doesn't necessarily matter if the games don't look as good. I'm looking for good gaming experiences. If I find that on a PC, if I find that on a handheld, if I find that on a phone, if I find that on a Game & Bloody Watch, then that is where I will purchase it. I'm cautiously optimistic, and even if it absolutely flops, I'll still get to play Bayonetta 2, and quite frankly, it's probably worth it just for that. Alright folks, that is me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the Mailbox. I'll see you next time.